can see a few of us are in now. We are going to start on time, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for being with us this morning. Some housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself muted so that we won't talk on top of each other. And also, if you have any questions, pop it in the chat so that I can ask it to our speaker today, who is Dr. Kang. And I've shared my screen with you before I introduce Dr. Kang. Here are her, it's kind of like her resume I'm putting towards everyone so that you know what she specializes in. So Dr. Kang specializes in interest and extensive clinical experience, and she's going to talk about parental guilt. Today, she's a very highly regarded psychologist and leads up Psych Connect here in Singapore and are very good partners with Expat Living. So I'm going to stop sharing and welcome Dr. Kang. How are you this morning?
I'm good. And yourself?
I'm very well, thanks. So for everyone who just joined us, we won't have a presentation today. We're going to have a conversation instead with Dr. Sanveen Kang. And I have all my questions here, so why don't we start? Dr. Sanveen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do over there at Psych Connect?
Yes. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I have been working in Singapore as a clin psych now for about 13, 14 years, maybe 15. I've lost track. But Psych Connect is a multidisciplinary team of mental health and allied health professionals, and we work across the lifespan. So we provide support for anywhere, starting with people as young as 12 months of age, all the way through, I want to say 70. Our oldest client is 70 years old. And we provide support across various areas specific to mental health, looking at how we can support people in living fruitful and psychologically healthy lives. So as I mentioned before, it's a multidisciplinary team. So we look at mental health from a beyond just the mind. So working with the body, working with various areas of communication, as well as traditional psychotherapies.
Fantastic. You guys do great work over there. So let's start with talking about parental guilt. And first of all, I wanted to ask you, like, what is parental guilt? And can you give us some examples from light to extreme situations?
Well, so parental guilt is essentially guilt where parents feel that anything they do will have, or anything they don't do will have a long-lasting impact on their child's lives. So basically, constantly questioning your ability to parent and the actions that you have. So oftentimes parents agonize in secret. I'd imagine that parental guilt is not something that's unknown to most people that have been parents. It has been around for as long as parents have been around. And it's often the question of, where have I gone wrong? Or will my child be damaged or suffer or lose out on opportunities because of actions I've chosen not to engage in, or decisions I've chosen not to, or something I failed to do. So what we're seeing now is increased parental guilt, especially in the Western culture, primarily because of lots of idolized expectations of what parents should be. As we're progressing as individuals, and as more and more research is coming out, what we're seeing is that people are starting to look at the parental role as being one where one is responsible not only for providing one's basic needs, but also being responsible for caring, nurturing, supporting your child socially and emotionally. And that's a lot of responsibility on one person to hold, as well as taking responsibility when your child does not meet certain expectations, or when their needs are not being met. So essentially, parental guilt presents as either stress or depression or very, very, very high levels of anxiety.
And actually, that is my next question. Like, what are the psychological signs of feeling guilty? Like, I mean, for me, we've been stuck in Singapore for 2 years now, and we can't travel. And usually, you know, with my children, my kids are like 8 and 12 now. And what we usually do, obviously, is like, if it's the summertime, we go and see my family in Denmark, and, you know, we visit. we do all the things that we love to do in Denmark, but these past 2 years have just not been,
Yeah.
possible to travel because of COVID, right? And I feel super guilty because, I couldn't give them what they, are used to and what they would like to do. So I've compensated by by taking them to all sorts of places around the island in Singapore and just, doing all sorts of activities, and expensive ones. So that is, I mean, I put my hand up and say I'm guilty of that. But what are the examples, for example, that you have seen in your practice?
Look, I think you've named quite a few things already. One of it is overcompensation. So, in the last 6 months or so, I would say increasingly what I've noticed is parents insinuating to overcompensation. And what I mean by that is, just looking at the summer break, what can I do? I noticed that kids were in all sorts of summer camps. Now, part of it is keeping them engaged and stimulated. They're losing out, or they've lost out a lot already in the last 2 years, not being able to go out and play. I've heard of parents whose kids are going off to university saying things like, in the last 2 years, my child hasn't had the opportunity to learn certain interpersonal skills and social skills and to experiment with various boundaries and rules. And now, 2 years later, being so sheltered, off they go on to the big bad world, and they're going to be independent, and I'm not going to be there. So that's very scary. We've heard of people over compensating through food, cooking much more lavish meals, feeling a lot more responsible in any areas that they have a little bit of control over their child's life, whether that is trying to figure out social activities, whether it's things like you said, very expensive activities during holidays, just really trying to get involved and control whichever aspects of their lives that they can in an effort to support their children, or to stimulate their children, or to compensate for their children losing out on experiences that we would have taken for granted, like going home, visiting grandparents, Christmas breaks, school holidays, short trips to Bali over the weekend. Little things like that were, I think, what people have identified as being normal day-to-day activities, and not being having to do so. We see people overcompensating. So that's one of the psychological signs. We see increased stress, guilt, anger as well, often directed at yourself or directed at the other person for not understanding. So depending on the age of the child, depending on the bandwidth of the parent, we do see various emotions that contribute to guilt. The other thing that I like to add is one of the ways to look at guilt is to think about it as an iceberg. So if you think about an iceberg that's floating in the ocean, there will be a tip of the iceberg that's visible, and then you've got a massive rock at the bottom that usually is hidden, and you don't know how big that rock is. You don't know whether it's a little one, it's a big one, how far it goes, how deep it goes. So on the top of that pyramid, the pyramid that's visible, or the iceberg that's visible, is guilt, and underneath the water, that huge rock, are all these emotions that make up guilt. Guilt is a very complex emotion. So you would have anger, you would have sadness, you would have jealousy, maybe even as you watch people overseas. Some countries have opened up, people are traveling. You might have, a whole bunch of emotions, envy. I'm trying to think of other emotions that could contribute, but there's so very many because it's so complex and it's such an individual experience.
I think I've ticked all of those emotional boxes for me. This is gonna sound like a funny question to you, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Would kids know how to make their parents guilty?
I would say, look, it's a hard one to answer because the intent then is that the child's purposely trying to make their parent feel guilty. I would say yes and no. I think thinking about the context would be helpful. Children, just like adults, want to get their needs met, right? And one of the ways we learn to get our needs met is to understand boundaries. What are boundaries? What can I get away with? What will be socially appropriate? Or what will be appropriate within my household but not appropriate outside of these lines. And one of the ways that children learn these boundaries and learn interpersonal skills and learn to manage conflicts is to test those boundaries with the people that are closest to them, and that's parents. And sometimes through that interaction, as they're negotiating, as they're trying to understand what's going on for you and going on for themselves, sometimes children will, and as do adults, talk about things that are fairly close to home, and depending on how the person's receiving it, so on the receiving end, it may seem like manipulation, it may seem like guilt, but I would say it would be helpful to reframe it as two things: your child testing boundaries and understanding what they can and cannot do, as well as trying to get their needs met.
Yeah, no, I asked this question because my kids always tag team on me and go, "Oh, mommy, please," and then I'll be like, "Oh, all right." And then I'm like, and then they have me hooked, and then that's it. I mean, it goes downhill from there. Okay, that's another question for you is, would single parents have more guilt compared to like, the nuclear family with two, with mom and dad, and would single parents have more guilt than a usual family of four, for example, two kids, two parents?
Okay. Again, guilt is a very individual experience. I would say it's safe to assume that every parent would experience guilt at some point in their parenting journey, but various factors impact the extent of the guilt. One is their own expectations. So how much responsibility do I take on myself as a parent? How responsible do I feel for my child? As well as the quality of the parental relationship. So if we think about a traditional family structure, whether it's mom or dad or two parents, if one parent is less involved than the other, then the guilt that the parent that's responsible or the primary caregiver is experiencing may not be less than a single parent unit. Also, with single parents, the assumption is that they, it takes a village, and some single parents have a lot of support around them, or that are able to manage a certain amount of stress that comes from the decision or comes from the experience of being a single parent. So I would say it's safe to assume, yes, just because we think about parenting as being a joint collaboration between two people. If both parties are putting in a good amount of effort, then that responsibility is diffused. But if they aren't, then one person may shoulder more of that responsibility. And also, depending on the individual parent's psychological state, even if two parents are shouldering the responsibility of raising children, if one parent tends to be a little bit more anxious or has certain experiences as a result of which they have certain belief systems that they are solely responsible for how their children's lives are going to spin out, and their decisions are heavy and weigh a lot, their guilt is going to exceed somebody else's.
Okay. And let's say, you take on all of this responsibility and all this guilt, and what can that possibly do to you? Like, for example, do you go into like a depression mode, for example, or do you need medication at the end, for example? What are the consequences of heavily guilt
parents? Yeah, I mean, I think going through life or going through each day thinking that you have done something wrong, or you are doing something wrong, or you haven't got the ability to make right decisions for the people who you love so very much, will lead to mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and again, depending on how this individual manages these emotions, that might lead to them needing professional help. Now, whether that professional help comes in the form of talk therapy or medication, that's dependent on the individual. When I look back at the work that I do and the stories that I hear from colleagues who also work with families, sometimes it's people mask their guilt so well because you can't see the physical impact of it, because it can be reframed as love, and it is love. It's coming from a place of pure, genuine love and worry for this little being that you're responsible for and whom you want to provide everything for. Oftentimes, guilt goes unnoticed, and what I've seen is, parents sometimes, when given the opportunity to talk about how they're feeling, just breaking down, and it's not just tears, but weeping in session, just because they feel so lost and they question every single decision that they make. And of course, this is one of the more extreme aspect of guilt, but it comes with a real sense of helplessness. Yeah.
Okay. And just talking about like for example, for me, when I get into like a guilt state, like how do I snap myself out of it? Are there any tips or, kind of like things to do just to say, hey, Susan, come on, get out of it now. Otherwise, you're going to go downhill.
Well, firstly, broadly speaking, there are two types of guilt. We have, if I would just put it as helpful and unhelpful guilt. Now, helpful guilt is when we have done something wrong, and we have a negative feeling where we know we have behaved inappropriately. And the purpose of that guilt is to allow us to repair relationships. Unhelpful guilt is the one that we've been talking about a lot, where it's self-inflicted punishment. It's generally from a very harsh and vindictive consciousness. And it's disproportionate to the situation at hand. So the first thing I would think, for the most part, is spending some time thinking about what's the purpose of this guilt? Like, is it serving a certain purpose? If I reflect on what I'm feeling guilty about, can I possibly place it into one of these two categories? Is it helpful or is it unhelpful? Is it helping me parent my child? And if it's not, recognizing that we can never parent effectively if we're going to be second guessing everything that we're doing. I've said this before, and we had that article in Expert Living this month, I believe. Children live within a system. We all do. And if we think about the systems within which we live, the first system around all of us is our family. And for young children, even teenagers, the people that are most prevalent in your lives are your parents. You've got friends, and yes, you've got schoolmates and a lot of that noise around you, but the people that are very much so responsible, whose actions you see and experience firsthand, are your parents. So recognizing the impact of the guilt and the role that it plays in your children's lives is very important. That being said, one of the first things I would do is embrace my feelings. And what that means is to recognize that guilt is just an emotion, just like any other emotion. And it's communicating something to me. Feelings often communicate what we need or what we are thinking about, or a certain fear. So listening to what they're telling you gives you clues into what you might need. So rather than running away from guilt and trying to put it into a box and lock it away, my suggestion is to lean into it and accept the emotion and focus on what it's trying to say to you. So, things like mindfulness can be very helpful at this point, allowing time for reflection and acceptance. The other is to focus on yourself. Oftentimes, guilt is about you and your fears and your insecurities. So recognizing that you first need to be okay before you can support your little ones. So parenting is challenging. Nobody is given a manual to go, this is what you need to do for this one, and this is what you need to do for that one, and these two are different in these sorts of ways. So it's an evolving process where, unfortunately, the only way to parent effectively is to be able to parent, to trust, to make decisions, to engage in risks, and to have the ability to look back on the decisions and to think about what went well and what didn't go well. And it's always evolving, right? As children grow, strategies that worked at one point in time will not work at other points in time. So going easy on yourself, recognizing that it's okay for your children to struggle sometimes. We don't need to jump in and fix things for them. And that they have the ability to be a lot more resilient than we think. And lastly, focusing on the power of forgiveness. A lot of times parents or individuals beat themselves up over choices that they have made that have had negative consequences. So if you identify with certain actions that you've made, allowing yourself to forgive yourself and move past those and looking at things as a learning experience rather than dwelling on how's that going to impact my child or what if I do this again. Forgiveness gives you the freedom to do the things that you intend to do.
Okay. When you say, you need to kind of, forgive yourself and, accept and focus on yourself. Let's give you a scenario. So we have let's say we have a working mom and she works full time. The dad works full time as well. And their kids go to international schools or local schools and they just don't have time for each other. And, the mom is feeling super guilty that she really has to work. Everyone is at home during COVID. So, the kids are over there doing e-learning and they need help with it. And mom and dad are having a conference call, meetings and online as well. So, no one can help each other and, something's got to give, right? And in this case, it's the mom. And so what would you suggest the mom should she approach this and how should she explain to her children, look, I'm really sorry, but I have to do this so that, I don't get redundant from my work because we can't afford to, live in Singapore if mom and daddy doesn't have work. So how would you approach it and how would you give her an advice on how she should approach this and speak to her children about that scenario so that she would feel, okay, it's okay for me to feel like this, but then how, you know what I mean? How would she snap out of it and feel better about the guilt that she's feeling?
The first thought that comes to my mind is first of all, there's no straightforward answer. And when a problem arises, our natural tendency is to go in and fix it. And with some problems, sometimes no matter how much we strategize, there's always going to be reminiscence of it left behind, right? So if she were to jump in and support the kids, then the conference call can't be attended to. Or she were to leave them to their own devices. Maybe they may figure it out. Maybe they won't. Maybe they might start arguing. Who knows what might happen. So the first solution I would say is openness to I'm not going to get it right. And being okay with that, being okay with knowing that I'm doing the best that I can. I know your question is, what do I explain to my children? How do I explain this to my kids? Again, that's dependent on the child's age. So if you've got very young children, recognizing that it's going to be hard to explain to them that you're not going to be able to attend to them. And they're going to barge in and out of your room and they're going to be coming in, knocking, yelling from the front door or in front of the door. And it's going to bring up certain emotion, but it's okay. It's okay for you to get mad and it's okay for you to have the emotions that you have. But depending on the child's age, this might just be developmentally appropriate. So you might expect that your child's going to come in and interrupt your meeting more than once. So being open to either that constant support, going back in, back out, I can't help you right now. With older children, they're less likely to seek help to that extent. But regardless of the age of children, I think one of the things that parents can do is recognize that there are many opportunities for repair. So if you turned your child away one time, it doesn't mean that your child's going to feel abandoned or rejected, and that's going to have a perpetual impact on them. You can go back after that conference call or at the end of the day, after school's done, and have a conversation about what happened and explain it in just the exact same way that you have, right? So this is a unique situation. In the past, mom will be at work and you couldn't pick up the phone and call me and you have your teacher in the classroom. And I couldn't jump in and help you as and when you needed help. Now I want to, and I will when I can, but mom has these things that I need to do, and sometimes I'm going to have to finish them before I can come back and talk to you. You can also spend some time allowing your children to share how they feel. So it's not so, the conversation isn't so one-sided, but allowing them to tell you, well, you know, it's very hard, or it's unfair because I want to spend time with you, or I haven't got anyone else to help me, or whatever they're feeling. So allowing space for your child to be able to communicate their feelings to you will allow you to have a conversation with them. And in that conversation, focusing on validating their emotions, validating your emotions, allowing space to process that emotion would then allow us to move towards resolution without judgment. So not going, well, you've got to understand because of this, but this is my piece. How does that make you feel when you hear me say that? What does it feel like for you when mom can't come and talk to you or can't come help you? And reflecting and acknowledging that that must be very hard, allowing space for them to feel how hard it must be, and then moving towards, well, what can we do? Can we come up with a system that might work? Is this something that we can leave for later on? And again, just thinking about what might work for the family as a unit, because what might work for one family may not necessarily work for the other.
Yeah, that's true. I wish all of these things came in like instructions and like a point by point
I
things to
know.
do, right?
Yeah.
But it
Wouldn't that be
doesn't.
nice?
So
Yes.
I like the fact that, accept your emotions and talk about it. I do really think that that is a really good idea. But what if you have teenagers who doesn't want to talk to you?
I think if you look back at yourself as a teenager, teenagers today are no different. And yes, they might not want to have long, drawn out conversations with you, but most teenagers will look up to their parents. Every teen that I've worked with, I work mostly with children and teenagers, but largely teenagers. I would say every teenager that comes into this room, regardless of the reason why they're coming in, want to make their parents proud. So they want your validation. They just may not want to do it in the same way that we do. So having short conversations, I call them bite-sized conversations when you can speak to them. Now, on the flip side, teenagers are less likely to come in and barge into your room and go, I need your help now to do da 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 da. They're more likely to figure it out themselves. And probably are a lot more tech savvy than I can say myself and most people that I know. So the scenario is different, right? It's not the same situation, and that's what I mean when I say it's not one size fits all, and it's certainly not that way for humans. Different people have different ways of engaging, and with teenagers, one of the reasons most teens are afraid to have conversations with their parents is because they feel like they're being judged. They feel that, mom's going to jump in and tell me when she was younger, she did things this way, and I want to do things that way. And even if a parent's intent is only to share, I just want you to know a little bit about me, a teenager might experience that as you're telling me what I'm doing is not okay. You're telling me that the way I'm approaching this situation is not okay, and you'd like me to do this instead. So I think bite-sized pieces help. Finding opportunities for conversations, finding opportunities to get to know your teenager. So if you get to know your teen as a person, what do they like? What kind of music do they listen to? And trying to enter their world, it's going to be easier for these conversations to unfold over a period of time. And I guess using their interests and opportunities, car rides, meals, and slowly one would find that these conversations become easier and easier.
That's good. That's a good advice. So let's flip it a little bit. So I have a few friends in Singapore who have actually moved back to their home country because they say, oh, my parents are, aging, and I really want to be with them so that we can have like quality time, and for some families that is not an option. So how do we approach this scenario of you have parents who live on the other side of the world and they want you to come back home, but you know, you have to be here because of job and things like that, and your life is here. So how do you approach that?
Again, no straightforward answer, isn't it? I
Mm.
think the place that we're at the moment is, you know, everyone's between a rock and a hard place. The reality is none of us had envisioned this, and nobody might have the right answers around what do you do, and what are the solutions, because this has never happened before, and it's something that lots of again, one of the conversations that I'm having is some people moved here thinking, you know, I'll travel Asia, I'll do this for 2 years, I get to experience this lifestyle, and it hasn't happened. And I, you know, despite the move, I thought I could go home every 6 months, I could fly back and check in with mom and dad, or the kids could go home for the summers. And, you know, the move hasn't spanned out the way it was initially envisioned. So that being said, I think it's really important to know that whatever your experience of the impact of the pandemic is, it's validated and it's real and it's specific to you. And any decision that you make is the best decision that you can make at this point in time. So for each individual family or each individual, it's reflecting on, I guess, what you want and what will be the best thing for you at this point in time. So for some people, it's going home and grieving the loss of decisions, opportunities that they thought they might have had or they've had to make, and losses that come with move. Any change comes with loss, even if it's a welcome change, even if you're going off to university and it's something that you want to do, it comes with loss. You know, you leave relationships behind, you have to grow up, and no change happens without loss. Change and loss come in interchangeably with each other. So in this situation, it's really just knowing that you're doing the best that you can, and it may not be the most perfect decision, and I think in most cases it's not going to be, but spending time being sure of what you want to do, as well as, again, making space for the emotions that are left behind, and not bringing more judgment and shame, and questioning and guilt. You know, we've got enough of that already.
Yeah, definitely. We have a lot of that. A question just came in. So how do I know if I need to get help for my feelings of guilt and stress? So when do we actually come and see you to say, this is getting too much, I need some help from you?
I would say any time. You don't have to let things hit rock bottom. Things don't have to get to a certain level for people to seek help. Help comes in many shapes and forms, and it comes in well, psychological help comes in various numbers of sessions. And there's some people that come in, we call them the worried well in our world, which is people who are having some challenges, but they're coping very well. You know, they're going to work, they're doing okay, they're feeling bad, but you know, they're functioning and they're getting on with life, which I think pretty much summarizes most of us, right? Where we will have some worries, but we're getting along with life and we're doing okay. This group of people will probably be in therapy for much shorter. So they might come in and engage in kind of like what you and I are doing right now, thinking about various things, having to sit with ambiguity, knowing that there is no straightforward answer, and learning skills to weigh out what I need to do. And sometimes that can lead and aid decision-making processes. But if we think about, again, people who are on the other side of the spectrum, who are starting to feel the impact of the pandemic and their emotions, one is trusting your gut. If you feel that you're not coping okay, you're probably not. If you've had family members or friends say things to you that suggest that, you know, maybe you might want to go speak to somebody, or are you sure you've been doing okay? It's probably time to lean into that and spend some time thinking about what that might mean. The more traditional symptoms include things like losing interest in activities that were previously pleasurable, impact on sleep, impact on mood, being teary-eyed, feeling angry, being easily irritable, anxiety, stress, you know, experience of various physiological symptoms, so heart palpitations. I've seen an increase in gastrointestinal disorders in recent times. So people are coming in with a lot more tummy aches, a lot more food and gastro issues, increased vomiting. I had one client that was 22 that came in recently with involuntary bowel movement, which, you know, so our body tells us, listening to your body can be a very helpful way to um, understand what is going on for you. A lot of times people, I'm kind of trailing off a little bit, but a lot of times people separate the body and the mind, but they're very much so in sync. Um, uh, our body will give us cues that things are not going okay. Um, so again, it just depends person to person, individual to individual. And you know, one of the other things that I would just end on with regards to that question is, if you're hesitant to go into therapy or getting help, I would ask myself why. You know, what's stopping me from having a conversation with this other person? Is it shame? Is it guilt? Is it um, stigma attached to seeking mental health support?
Hmm.
There's a
I
lot.
think,
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think it's also good to just kind of come and validate your feelings from a professional point of view, right? So, I mean, I know you can talk to your friends and you can share your feelings with them, but I think it's quite good to sometimes see somebody who actually know what they're talking about. Like, not saying that friends don't know how to talk about feelings, but like talking to a professional like you would kind of validate the feelings that you're feeling and say, actually, it's all right to kind of feel these things, and also give advice in return, right? So
Yeah,
absolutely, I think if anyone who is feeling, a little bit stressed out, guilty, or depressed, I think it's definitely worth seeing somebody, even if it's just one time, right? Or two times, seeing professionals, and definitely get something out of your chest and get some constructive feedback from a professional back.
yeah.
um, hmm. I just want to ask everybody if they have any more questions, because I'm quite concerned of time, because I know you have another session at 11 o'clock. So does anyone else have any questions for Dr. Sanveen this morning? I think we're good. But if people do have more questions for you, and if they want to contact you directly, can we give them your contact, and they can call the clinic and maybe
Yes,
send you an email as well?
absolutely. You know, so I just want to add to one thing that you said, if that's okay, talking about how therapy is different from a conversation with a friend, because that's something I hear a lot, regardless of the age ranges of people that are coming in. But one of the biggest difference in therapy in comparison to just a regular conversation is that in therapy, first of all, the person that you're talking to doesn't know anything about your life. So it's really a very fresh perspective on what's going on. But above and beyond that, in therapy, one of the things that we're doing, two things at any point in time. One of the things that we do is process, where we spend a lot of time helping you understand how do things get to where they are right now, and understanding what is going on for you. And sometimes for some people that is validation, that's enough, and we can make sense of the journey, and we can make sense of the emotions. And sometimes we need a little bit more than process. We need certain skills to help us now. I understand how this has happened, but I'm also left behind with these emotions and these experiences, and what do I do with that? So at any point in time in a therapy setting, we're alternating between helping you process and providing you with some skill. Um, and that's how it can be very different from just a conversation with a friend. And the other thing that's very different from a conversation with a friend is, with friendships, we have the tendency, again, of wanting to jump in and make our friend feel better, and wanting to jump in and fix those emotions and take away the ugly and replace it with, joy and happiness. And in therapy, there's space for every kind of emotion. Your emotions aren't bad. Like I said, feelings are trying to communicate something to you that are most innate human experience. So we want to lean into them, and a therapist is not going to try and fix them for you, but rather we want you to have a space where you can come in and you can feel them uninterrupted, and in a safe environment, knowing that it's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point to end there. Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
joining us this morning, and thank you for all the tips. And as I said, people can always, I'm going to share your details with everybody so that people can always contact you. Just, you know, if they have any questions or need advice or anything like that. Yes, you're going to join us next month again, talking about people going back to work and how they feel about that. Because I heard not many people are happy about going back to work in the office. They'd rather stay at home. But I'm looking forward to that conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Kang. Have a wonderful Friday and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, everybody, for coming this morning and joining us, and thank you so much for always coming to our talks and being so constructive. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.